Influence through Grassroots and Government Action. Hopefully you all managed to get some food in your bellies. For those who actually didn't manage to pick up a lunchbox, we've gone out to order more. I understand this is part of the social contract of coming for a panel event, so don't worry. We also want to thank the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for providing this lunch and also for supporting the travel of one of our speakers today, Min Jiang, who represents the Taiwan Economic Democracy Movement. First, a little bit of housekeeping. If you're not familiar with the Global Taiwan Institute, we're a 501c3 think tank dedicated to insightful, cutting-edge, and inclusive research on policy issues regarding Taiwan. GTI's mission is to enhance the relationship between Taiwan and other countries through policy research that promotes better public understanding about Taiwan and its people. Please subscribe to our flagship Global Taiwan Brief for bi-weekly analysis of Taiwan issues. And for those watching the live stream, if you wish to ask any questions to our panelists, please type them in the chat window on your YouTube feed or email them directly to us at contact@globaltaiwan.org. So the subject we are discussing today, the PRC's economic influence, is indeed broad. This problem appears differently depending on where you stand. In developing countries, Beijing finances major industrialization and infrastructure initiatives that bind local economies to the PRC. In developed countries, Beijing threatens trade boycotts and sanctions in response to the policy decision it opposes. Meanwhile, across the world, PRC economic actors funnel incentives to influential decision makers, whether illegally through bribes or legally, such as through lucrative board member appointments. All these actions and more are treated under the umbrella of PRC economic influence. When the Chinese Communist Party liberalized its economy in the 1980s and 90s, many analysts predicted that the emergence of a private sector would destroy the CCP's base of power. However, I rather think that an embrace of private property was one of the best policy decisions ever made by the CCP. Now it can secure support for its regime, not just through ideology, but the far stronger incentive that is greed and personal profit. The CCP wields the power of financial incentive to encourage people and governments to forsake liberal values in exchange for economic gain. Beijing will continue to use this tool in its arsenal for as long as it has the economic clout to do so. So today we're going to talk about solutions to the PRC's economic influence. Now, just as there is no single characterization of this influence, there is also no single solution. Countering the illiberal consequences of PRC economic influence takes effort from many kinds of actors. I've assembled a variety of actors today to talk to you. In countries that directly experience this influence, civil society must step forward to push back. Democratic governments must also seek to engage with countries relying too heavily on the PRC economic development. And in many cases, the PRC capitalizes on a lack of awareness from foreign companies and subnational governments to gain political concessions, including related to Taiwan. Education on safe engagement with PRC businesses is necessary. So I'll turn to our speaker. Our first speaker is Taiwanese, and he's flown from Atlanta, Georgia, to speak to us today. Min Jiang is a non-resident fellow at the Taiwan Economic Democracy Union, where he focuses on China's economic coercion towards Taiwan, and at the Research Institute for Democracy, Security, and Economic Technology. He is a non-resident fellow, and there he specializes in economic security and the semiconductor industry. Min Jiang, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Hello everyone. I am Min Jiang, and in order to ensure tight control, please let me follow my script. And I'm looking forward to a discussion later. And I'm currently the non-resident fellow at the Taiwan Economic Democracy Union. I previously worked full-time at TEDU for 3.5 years, where I focus on investigating cases involving Chinese capital in Taiwan, organize international connections for the Taiwan-Hong Kong democracy movement, and advocate for the legislation to strengthen our social solidarity in Taiwan. TDU was born. This book. Yes. Yeah. TDU was born out of 2014 Southbound Movement as a civil society organization. Over the years, this fest has attracted many volunteers from civil society, all working together to participate in Taiwan's political civic movements. Like me, as a non-resident fellow, I continue to assist TEDU in its advocacy and research work. Our members come from a wide range of backgrounds, including well-known scholars from various academic fields, lawyers, long-time NGO workers, business people, and experts from diverse fields. Recently in Taiwan, maybe you all know, the crisis of parliamentary abuse has sparked a powerful wave of civic mobilization. With the Bluebird movement unfolding in full force, TEDU is one of the key organizers of this movement, drawing significant attention from citizens across Taiwan. I want to use the development of the Bluebird movement to define what TEDU calls political civic movement. I would like to call lawyer Lai Chiang, TEDU's convener, who pointed out in his op-ed during the Bluebird movement. We understand that this parliamentary abuse crisis is the first track by the group of local collaborators working with China to undermine Taiwan's democratic system. We must firmly assert that Taiwan's democratization remains unfinished. Defending our democracy cannot rest solely on political parties. At this critical moment, Taiwan needs its citizens to unite and confront the refinement of the OKMT authoritarian regime, authoritarian legacy. We must strive for the transformation for the political system until KMT can no longer threaten Taiwan democratic institutions and a strong homegrown second party can emerge and thrive. This grassroots civic movement goal and methodology represent what I call the current stage of Taiwan's political civic movement. And TEDU continue the goal of Sunfall movement by resisting China's political and economic influence. Years ago, we launched the project called Observatory of Chinese Capital, which involved deep analysis of Chinese influence behind several Taiwan or Hong Kong-based companies and developing actions planned in response. We have focused on industries such as travel agencies, logistics companies, finance, media, and more. Our methodology combines legal analysis with an open source intelligence approach to identify the business model through which Chinese capital enter Taiwan. Moreover, we highlight how Taiwan's existing legal framework is insufficient to address this threat. I would like to use Evergreen Laurel Hotel incident happened in this the past August, to illustrate the importance of our investigative work. This August, a Chinese internet influencer stayed at the Evergreen Laurel Hotel in Paris, maybe you remember that, and caused a scene in lobby after failing to find a Chinese national flag on display. The influencer then shared the incident online, sparkling outrage among Chinese netizens. Following this, media reports emerged that online travel agencies, including the China Ctrip and Taiwan's Easy Travel, had removed the Evergreen Laurel Hotel from their online listings. This suggested that the hotel was being targeted by Chinese-owned business in retaliation for the flag incident. This case exemplified how Chinese economic influence can be used as a tool for political retaliation. So, Easy Travel is Taiwan's largest online travel agency and holds a vast amount of personal data from Taiwanese consumers. However, it is a subsidiary of China's Ctrip, which poses a significant economic security risk to Taiwan. Ctrip began investing in Easy Travel in 2006. By 2009, during the early years of Ma Ying-jeou administration, despite the fact that Taiwan had not yet opened its travel industry to Chinese investment, Chinese company Ctrip has acquired a controlling interest in Easy Travel, with its ownership peg reaching as high as 97%. Let's take a look back at the tourism policy and the Ma Ying-jeou administration's approach to cross-strait economic integration. In May 2008, after the transfer of power in Taiwan, Taiwan and China reached an agreement on Chinese resident travel to Taiwan. On July 1st that year, the first group of Chinese tourists traveled to Taiwan, and 2 weeks later, Taiwan has fully opened its doors to residents from all 31 provinces and cities in China for travel. However, the model of Chinese group tour in Taiwan later faced significant criticism. Many of the travel agencies directed tourists to shops connected to Chinese capital, failing to provide broad interest benefits to Taiwan's local tourism industry. TEDU has launched several initiatives, collaborating with legislators and councillors like Chen Bo-wei, Miao Boya in this picture, to draw attention to this issue. So, in addition, we have released our analysis reports. From this, we can clearly see how C-Trip exerts control over easy travel through its shareholding structures. C-Trip, these Chinese travel agencies, listed in US under the name called Trip.com, owns C-Trip International, which holds 19.8% of Easy Travel's parent company. Easy Travel has used this percentage, 19.07%, to claim it is not controlled by a Chinese capital. However, Trip.com's financial report has for years listed Easy Travel as a subsidiary, consolidating it into the parent company's financial statements. Furthermore, if you examine the shareholder list of Easy Travel in Taiwan, you will find a high-level executive from C-Trip directly listed on Taiwan's board of directors. Easy Travel has concealed this C-Trip executive by registering them in Taiwan as foreign nationals, which is why our Department of Investment Review did not initially identify them as Chinese. These tactics are clearly designed to embed Taiwan's regulation, exploiting loopholes to allow China to infiltrate Taiwan economic society. Okay, our demands are straightforward. We urge the Department of Investment Review to immediately order the withdrawal of illegal Chinese capital from Easy Travel and call on a tourism bureau to issue orders restricting the cross-border transmission of Taiwanese citizens, all citizens' personal data in accordance with our current cybersecurity laws. As a result, TDU efforts have already yielded notable progress. First, Easy Travel, which had long monopolized Taiwan's railway island-wide train contracts, now faces competition from more local companies, breaking its previous dominance in this area. Second, 2 high-level executives from C-Trip mentioned earlier have left Easy Travel board of directors. While we cannot be certain whether they still maintain substantial influence, TDU's advocacy has clearly had some impact, creating a degree of restraint. As more people become aware of China's economic coercion against democratic nations, TDU has seized more opportunities to engage in international advocacy. You may recall that before 2024 presidential election in Taiwan, and China launched a trade barrier investigation against Taiwan. Officially, they claimed this was a response to Taiwan's unequal trade measure. But in reality, it was a form of pressure on Taiwan's society. The message from China was clear. If Taiwanese voters didn't choose a pro-China candidate, they would face economic consequences. In its retaliatory measure, China repeatedly insisted that Taiwan has violated WTO regulations. TDU, however, offered a different perspective. First, mutual restriction on economic and trade exchange between Taiwan and China had long existed due to the military standoff and tension. The international communities has respected this unique economic relationship including trade barrier without requiring change during the Taiwan and China WTO entry. Second, Taiwan has consistently advocated for resolving these restrictions through the WTO multilateral mechanism, demonstrating our goodwill. However, China has insisted on addressing trade barrier under the so-called One China framework, using trade as a political tool to further its annexation goals. We believe that the global community, united by our commitment to democracy, is ready to step in when countries face economic coercion from China. For example, Japan promoted Taiwanese pineapples, and our pineapple farmers were sanctioned by China. Similarly, Taiwan promoted Australian wine when China imposed retaliatory tariffs on it. In response, democratic nations must turn goodwill and political appeal into a constant system of mutual support. But it's clear that authoritarian regimes are restricting import or export to apply economic pressure. Democracies to implement countermeasures. This includes creating reciprocal mechanisms to enhance procurement or supply of the affected goods or services, building a mutual aid framework. Therefore, a democratic defense trade agreement should be designed to protect and strengthen democratic nations against such coercive economic tactics. So, currently, the legislative section is still in Taiwan is still going on. And TEDU, along with many other civil society groups, continue to launch initiatives to prevent unreasonable bills from passing. We have like 2 or 3 press conferences this week. I will stop here, but I will stop my sharing here. But this political civic movement in Taiwan continue to press on, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fascinating, and I think it's incredible to see an instance of you catching an attempt by the PRC entity to circumvent investment regulations in Taiwan. I think that really shows the value of civil society in providing oversight where the government is often failing. So I'm going to turn to our next speaker. He's here from the US government, Francisco Bencosme. He's a senior policy advisor and the China policy lead for the United States Agency for International Development. You may know it as USAID. In this role, he is the principal advisor to the administrator on issues relating to the People's Republic of China and Taiwan. Prior to joining USAID, Francisco was the deputy to the Special Presidential Envoy for Compact of Free Association negotiations, helping to conclude 3 20-year compact agreements with the Republic of Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of Palau in the Pacific Islands. And currently, he was the senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Dan Crittenbank, where he advised on strategic planning, speechwriting, democracy, human rights, and other cross-cutting issues. His resume is very long, so I'll stop there and I'll pass it over to him. Francisco, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that introduction and for the invitation to speak here and be here with you all. Thank you to the Global Taiwan Institute. It's a pleasure to be here, not only on this really important topic, but on this really important week when leaders from around the world gather for the World Bank and IMF meetings and to discuss the future of international financial architecture. So it's really important that we talk about economic coercion, economic influence in the backdrop of such meetings. As Ben mentioned, I'm the China policy lead for USAID. And so while I have some knowledge of all of the US government's work, most of my comments will be focused on how USAID is really tackling this issue. And I should mention that I sit in the Office of Policy, which the administrator created about a year ago. And the PRC office sits there. And it's important to mention because we are not part of the Asia Bureau, which is where I think other China offices are sitting, because we recognize that the sort of China issue set is a global development actor. And so USA needs to be able to provide analysis, recommendations, and strategy as that global development actor, as opposed to simply through just simply in Asia or in the Pacific frame. As folks know, the U.S. national security strategy has called the People's Republic of China the only actor with both the means and intent to reshape the international order. And that extends across multiple sectors: political, economic, and security. And what's interesting about this topic is that it really also cuts across all three of those, and increasingly in our work, particularly in the international development frame. Not a lot of people know this, but the White House also recently released a U.S. global development strategy, which also said that the PRC presents a unique and unprecedented challenge to U.S. development and humanitarian priorities around the world, and will continue to do so in the coming decade. This is the first time the U.S. has publicly, in such a strategy document, really made that declaration. So it's a long way of also saying that we see the PRC in all of our work. They're increasingly an important development actor. We operate in over 100 countries, and a lot of our missions are seeing the impact that the PRC is having on development, including economic coercion and economic growth issues in their everyday work. And so, for example, I was just in Southeast Asia a couple of weeks ago, and even though we oftentimes talk about our USAID programs at a mission level, implicitly was also how these issues also intersects with what the PRC is doing in many of our Southeast Asia partners. And to this, I think to a testament to this conference or workshop, a lot of our work doesn't just happen in the halls of power or in ministries of foreign affairs, but also happen with talking to many of our local civil society partners. They happen when we work with academia. They happen when we speak to private sector, because they're increasingly seeing the impact that the PRC is happening on whole of societies, and really not just sort of siloed within our foreign policy work. So what is USAID's response to this? Let me start off by saying that when we talk about PRC economic influence and then how it impacts our broader strategic environment, our answer doesn't start with the PRC. We think that gives them actually too much credit. And instead, we think that in our agency's work, our story and values must begin with what we are for, not what we are against, our positive affirmative agenda. Sometimes this is in the context of positive economic statecraft. So there's a lot of discussions around sanctions, export bans, but USAID really is in that intersection of what is that offer that we bring to the table to many of our partners in the developing world, in the emerging economies, with ultimately the goal of building free and open societies and societies that are resilient to be able to withstand the types of attacks from malign foreign actors like economic coercion. This is important framing for the work that we do because many of our partners do not want to be stuck in a geopolitical competition between the US and China. And so our approach is not about forcing countries to choose between US assistance and other forms of financing. Rather, it's about working in partnerships towards sustainable development solutions around our shared goals. So when USAID creates our country development strategies, we first work with our partners and multiple stakeholders within those countries to identify what are their development priorities. We don't start by asking ourselves, what is the PRC doing in those third-party countries? We understand that many of our partners are looking for financing and options from many sources, but USAID supports our partners in expanding their overall development finance and options. We want to give partners choices, not create a forced choice with our partners. And we also want to make sure that our partners understand the risks and have the tools to mitigate them, especially when it comes to the PRC. And I'll give a couple of examples in a couple of minutes. For the record, the United States also welcomes contributions by the PRC to the global international development, so long as they adhere to high standards including in areas of transparency, rule of law, and sustainable financing, and respect for the autonomy of development aid recipients. The same standards that we hold ourselves to and to our partners as well. So let me talk to you a little bit about USAID model. I mentioned that it's a positive and affirmative agenda, but we focus on principles and practice that elevate inclusion, transparency, independence, agency, sustainability, and the respect for human rights and democratic norms. We have decades-long history of supporting partners to achieve their own priorities and self-determination, and we invest in critical areas for long-term sustainable development and the foundations for open, transparent, and sovereign societies. So, for example, we have a long proven track record. So today, 11 of the 15 top U.S. trading partners were once recipients of American development assistance. The example that our administrator always uses is of South Korea. Once a recipient of USAID, assistance, now increasingly South Korea is a provider of development assistance around the world, because our model is focused on sustainability, not dependence, not extraction, or creating or removing the agency of many of our partners. Overall, we've helped eradicate smallpox, reverse the spread of HIV, contain Ebola, and save some 1 billion people from malnutrition during the Green Revolution. So we're really proud of the work that USAID has done, but we also recognize that there are new challenges that many of our partners face, and that sometimes we have to do a better job of being able to communicate and help our partners understand the work that USAID is doing. We also approach development through a different perspective from our adversaries. We're proud that our assistance doesn't actually have to be repaid. Our assistance is not on a loan. A lot of our assistance to low and middle income countries is grants-based, not loans, which is oftentimes, people don't always understand that. And they say, well, the PRC gave this amount of money at the Africa Leaders Summit. This is how much the US is giving. Well, we're talking about apples and oranges, right? We give grants. We don't focus on debt or dependence, but we focus more on trade, integration, inclusivity, and locally led solution. So there's a big emphasis right now in the development landscape about helping support local actors and helping build local capacity so that they can continue that sustainable work beyond the time that USAID is there. That's different than shipping or importing many of your own laborers or your own state-owned enterprises to do a lot of the work in many of these countries. So overall, we've been successful in building strong societies in working with our partners to build their own path to success. But we're still clear-eyed that what Beijing does abroad has a detrimental impact to our national security interests and USAID's affirmative development agenda. So it's important to also state that we're not focused on changing the PRC. We're focusing on advancing, again, an affirmative vision to support the development rules-based society, those principles of localization, agency, democratic norms around the way we do development, where we work, and we believe that our development tools play a critical role in that. So sectorally, here's a couple of the places that we work on in this issue. The first one is to support our partners in economic resilience to help them make sovereign decisions in line with their interests and values, free from external pressure. That looks like it takes many different forms. But for example, in Zambia, we provided technical assistance so the Zambian government can apply for an IMF loan that really helps them on public procurement. In a place like Guatemala, where they were facing PRC economic coercion for a phone call, as reported by the press, we have been investing. One of the places that apparently the PRC retaliated in was around coffee farmers. The USAID has been investing in diversifying the markets of Guatemalan coffee farmers, something that you would not think is at the crosshairs of geopolitical issues, but that resilience helped Guatemala make sure that they weren't, that they had the capacity to not fall with sand from the PRC. We also work on democracy issues, so with civil societies, like many of the ones that we're talking about here to provide research, to provide transparency, inclusivity, really important partners. We also are increasingly working on emerging technology and critical digital solutions for many of our development issues. We just rolled out a USAID digital policy, as well as elevated our digital office to be part of the front office. We see digital as one of those cross-cutting issues that will impact and revolutionize all of our development work. And who builds that hardware and software matters for the norms that we're trying to promote on development issues. Maybe the last thing I'll say is that a couple things is that we know that we cannot compete dollar for dollar, so we have to work with partners and allies. So that's why building the sustainability of our donors is super important, because we're not the only ones that care about this development model. We have partners in Europe, in South Korea, in Japan, and increasingly work with Taiwan as well to really foster development cooperation, to really provide a better offer and be able to meet the development needs of many of our partners. It's also important to state that our model is focused on private sector growth. So we're not competing, again, state-owned enterprise per, U.S. assistance grants. When we're oftentimes working on creating an enabling environment so that international businesses can then provide the type of economic growth. We don't always measure that. When a company goes in and provides a new company, they don't always contact the embassy. And that oftentimes, the U.S. doesn't get credit. But that is still our development model at play. The last thing I'll just say is that we have to do a better job as development professionals of getting our story out there. I'll give you an example. The administrator just this week alone is in Cambodia. And because of decades of investments, we have turned the page on malaria in Cambodia, but essentially almost curing malaria in Cambodia. Now, if you were to Google Cambodia, U.S. government, the headline would be about China. It would be about military basing, of course, issues that are really important. But this issue of like how our investments have really helped the people of Cambodia on this crucial public health issue doesn't always garner the same kind of attention. But we think that's also really important when we talk about our offer that we're making to free and open societies. So maybe I'll just end by saying that there's still a lot of more work to do, but we really believe that this is a whole of government issue and a whole of society issue. So that means working with civil society, it means working with other partners in order to be able to support open, free, and resilient societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. That's fascinating. I think this topic came up in the Taiwan symposium that GTI held last week, which is if you're competing, the US is trying to compete with China on a narrative of development overseas. It often struggles to communicate its successes, especially in areas like public health. In this case, we spoke about eliminating malaria in Cambodia, and these issues really are overlooked. And it's also great to hear that USAID has such a clear strategy and set of principles in its engagement with China. That's very encouraging. So I'll turn to our last speaker here. And we're very glad to welcome Zoë Weaver-Lee. Zoë, she is the programs coordinator at the East-West Center in Washington, and she's actually a former program associate here at the Global Taiwan Institute. Her research focuses on Taiwan's foreign assistance policy and China's economic influence in the Indo-Pacific. Zoë has participated in renowned programs such as the Taiwan-US Policy Program, and presented her research at the North American Taiwan Studies Association Conference. So I'll hand it over to Zoë.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you to everybody at GTI for pulling this together. Thank you, Union, and Francisco for joining the conversation as well. It's great to be here on the panel with you. A quick disclaimer off the bat. My thoughts in today's discussion don't necessarily represent the views of the East-West Center. We are a congressionally funded institution. We do have an office in Hawaii that is our home base, and I work here at the so we have a lot of programs that work both in Hawaii and DC, but I'm going to highlight several that are here in the United States working with local states and local leaders and funds. So on today's topic of China's economic influence, there are three key issues that I think when it comes to subnational level engagement between the United States, Taiwan, and China, I think these three issues stand out the most in terms of economic influence from China. The first of which being the manipulation of economic tools for political gain. That's the basis of our discussion. Things like restricting agricultural imports, like Min Yin said, after the Pelosi visit to Taiwan, that's one example. The second is access to sensitive information and data. This is one of the biggest concerns when it comes to China's influence, sale of technology. That's another thing that Min Yin spoke about and works on. And finally, fostering dependence for future leverage. This is something that comes up a lot when it comes to China's development assistance, is that they're somehow fostering a dependence from its partners so that in the future they have to work with China and they become dependent on China. So how are states in the United States feeling these influences, if at all? Do they care about these type of risks associated with working with China? And if so, how can US-Taiwan local engagement mitigate these risks? We have to talk about the current state of subnational US and US-Taiwan engagement. So shameless plug here. This is something that the East-West Center Washington does early. This is just one of our many publications. We do Taiwan Matters for America, America Matters for Taiwan. This tracks on a subnational basis, local exchanges, investment, trade, tourism. It's mainly data emphasis, but we also illustrate these stories with short, brief articles as well. We have one of those for pretty much every state in the Indo-Pacific. But one of the things that we're seeing here is a disconnect between what's happening on the national level and what's happening on the subnational level. On the national level in the United States, we see greater regulation, technology transfers and technology investments, right? We see greater trade barriers, more strict investment reviews and restrictions, and even a restriction on exchanges people to people, right? The defunding of Confucius Institutes, more strict assessments of Chinese scholars that are based here in the United States. So even on the people level, we're seeing a greater restriction on that. Overall, on the state and local level, China is very much viewed as an important economic partner. And I have several metrics to kind of explain and illustrate why this is the case. For a lot of local economies, the number one priority is the economic resilience of their community. And oftentimes, China is viewed as an important partner in that effort. So this is, again, another shameless plug. This report has not come out yet, but we have an American Public in Elite Opinion on Asia Matters for America. This will be coming out on the 29th of this month. So I'll be pulling a lot of metrics from this. With this report, we polled both elites and general public. Elites referring to bureaucrats, public officials, and business leaders, right, and versus the general public. One of the things that we found is that there's little to no difference in both public and elite opinion on how they view economic engagement with China versus other countries. So on a state and local level, a lot of these localities do not view China as a negative influence any more than they do any other Asian country. That's important to start off with. The second is when asked which Asian countries create the most jobs in their community, China is by far and large listed the number one job creator in their economy. Compare that to Taiwan, only 21% of elites say that Taiwan is the number one job creator in the community, with only 9% of the general public thinking Taiwan is a job creator in their community. And along with this, something that's come up quite a bit in this conversation is when it comes with the risk of China's economic influence, it's this expansion of foregoing liberal democratic values, as you said, Ben. Do states care about this? Do localities actually care about declining democratic values in their community? Well, we didn't ask that exact question in this poll report. One very telling statistic is that elites in general view democracy in Asia as important, whereas the general public, by and large, does not care about the state of democracy in Asia. So just something to consider when we talk about what's the selling point for finding an alternative to China. When it comes to local engagement, it's not a huge selling point. So just something to think about. So how can local engagement present opportunities to maybe subvert this influence? First being presenting Taiwan as a lesser known alternative in localities. I just got back from Minnesota last week. We did a program as part of our Japan Matters for America Roadshow, where we go to states all over the United States and we host events on, usually panels, networking receptions on Japan's interaction with their state and local economy. One of the things that I very quickly notice is that when a country is showing up, Japan also is listed with China as one of the biggest job creators across the United States. It creates a positive influence across all sectors, culturally, in the educational realm, in the social realm, people to people realm. All these different sectors are influenced purely because that state has an economic investment in that individual. So showing, I hate this term, but raising awareness about Taiwan and what it presents for a local economy is important. This can come from sharing information, familiarizing local communities with what's available. Another program that we do is called the Governor's Staff Program, where we actually take administrative staff from local governors' offices to the region. We went to Japan, we went to South Korea, and they meet with counterparts there. They meet with, the mayor of Seoul, and they learn about what's governance like in Seoul versus their home in Minneapolis. So we find that this can be an important tool for familiarizing Americans on a local level with both governance as well as commercial opportunities. So that could be a great opportunity for Taiwan to help do that. The second is communicating impact, showing the statistics, showing how much Taiwan is investing in these communities and how much, even things like how much do tourists spend when they come to your state? How much do local international students spend when they study at your universities? That type of data is really important to communicate the impact of just how important Taiwan is to your community as alternative to China. And finally, it sounds silly in this huge realm of regulating technology and all these risks that come along with it, but creating people-to-people connections is super important. So much of what I hear from local business owners when it comes to why do you trust Japan so much? Why do you invest in Japan so much? And it's because they come here. They visit us in our office here. And then I go there and I visit their office. And it's that face-to-face connection that has built just decades of trust between local states. Of course, Taiwan does do that. There's plenty of trade missions, more and more. There are a lot of people in the audience who help run these missions. More and more are going to Taiwan, and that's a really important tool to use. So these are just a few things that we have found both through our programs that we run across the United States, as well as some of the polling that we've done, that although on a national level, we do see an effort to regulate economic influence from China, at least on a subnational level, it's a very different story. So I'll stop there and happy to hear any questions you have.
Thank you, Zoe. I'm very much looking forward to reading that report. It was hinted at last week when I met your director in DC, Satu. Yeah, this will be probably some topic of discussion that we'll turn to now, but it is a question about, at the local level, how interested are economic actors, local government in these larger questions of illiberalism, China's, rising status. That's something that's probably is not the first priority, and it makes the work of the speakers here challenging. I have questions, but I'd like to ask the audience if they have any questions now. We're going to turn to Q&A. This gentleman doesn't. I know we have a lot of time, so I'd like to get everybody in. So this gentleman in the front.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I appreciate that you guys are doing your best to give China a wide berth in several countries. But at some point, the Chinese reluctance to either generate an environmental impact statement, much less abide by it, has got to be ruining your work. So how do you guys deal with that particular issue?
Yeah, so for this topic, it's been focused on economic resilience, but we also invest a lot on environmental programs. And so whether that's civil society that tracks that environmental degradation, or I bet you that a lot of the sources that you use to identify that China doesn't meet that environmental impact statements are actually places that we've worked with very closely, particularly a couple of research institutions in the United States. But then there's a transparency aspect, but then there's also how do we, like for example, on the Mekong, we make sure that we bring the data that we come out with or that our partners come out with on the environmental impact of PRC dams in the upstream in the Mekong. We share that with our government partners. And then, in an agnostic kind of way, we say, look, here's the evidence and the data. And we're going to let you come to the conclusions as to who you should be raising some of these really concerning issues, like water security, environmental security, to your partners. And we've seen that to be kind of an effective way to shaping the environment we work with. Sometimes when the U.S. is the first one to call it out, it falls into a sort of a Cold War type rhetoric. And this is about the environment. This is about the people who are downstream from the Mekong, for example, and the local populations that are being impacted by the environmental degradation or by environmental impact of dam use upstream, right? So that's sort of how we tackle some of these issues.
I think Fang Long had her hand up first. If you just raise your voice, we'll have the microphone in a second, but I think for now, this.
I'm from the London School of Political Science. My question is the Tesla the motors considered as the grassroots of the business? And China offer the Tesla motor, particularly in Shanghai, very good deal to develop the Tesla, this business in China. And also the owner, Elon Musk, only the speak for the Republican candidate, Trump. Right, so how is going on? Is China prefer Trump? And this kind of how will this influence this democracy, the countries?
So I'll turn this to Vivian because not only does he work on Taiwan Economic Influence, he's also at a think tank called DSET, which looks at technology. Do you have any thoughts about this, Vivian?
I don't have specific thought on Tesla case. However, if we look into the long history about U.S.-China economic relations and how it impacts the economic security issue like over 60 to 40 years, especially when we look back into the Clinton tenure that he opened up re-established the economic tie with China. U.S. business in this sector is always it's a very big influence on it. Why U.S. would have a U-turn in 90s and to reconnect and to somehow not let emphasize on human rights issue after Tiananmen Square events. And business in U.S. is one of the big factors we have to consider. And now even we are now facing a new era of geopolitics, especially in the field of emerging technologies like semiconductor, AIs, and we are discussing about whether U.S. government, both Biden administration or the previous Trump administration, whether it's a higher export control measure on this emerging technology. There's still some discussion in the business field that they would hurt their interest of selling chip, selling software tools, selling any kind of US product to China, and it is bad for them. So there was always tension between the government side, the regulations measure, and the business interests. And I'm not that familiar with US situation in US society, but at least in Taiwan, I think the civil society still played a very important role, especially in terms of how we supervise or urge the government to push forward on our economic security regulations. Yeah, for example, we like an easy travel case or like the other technology industry case, the ruling party would always have pressure from industry side whether to enhance the measure on controlling, for example, the most advanced chip made in Taiwan, whether they could like sell to China or whether we should formulate a new legal framework on the critical technologies. And then finally, our government failed to do that. But still, if the civil society or the policy making circle, we have still have some attention on it, and the discussions on this kind of policy is still like going on.
My question actually for Francis.
Okay, Francisco, yeah, go ahead. Any thoughts on that?
We don't operate inside mainland China and we're probably not to talk about politics.
Yeah.
I'll focus on policy, so I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, I think I did see an order. We have a gentleman on the end and I've got Richard. You on the end, sir, with the hat.
Here with the hat, it's Taiwanese Indian. Everybody can recognize the tribe.
No,
Genuine, this is actually from Taiwan.
which tribe?
So I think there's 16 indigenous
Yeah.
tribes in Taiwan. Your slide's a little out of date, talking about the lack of a second domestic political party. I think the Taiwan People's Party got 26 or 27% in the vote. And I was looking at your report here about the Freedom House score with Taiwan 2020 was 94, the US was 83. And in a couple of weeks, we might see the gap growing even larger and not in our favor. With the political or the legal problems of the Taiwan People's Party's candidate, I don't know how they're going to be resolved. Do you think there's going to be a blow to that second domestic political party, or do you think that the Taiwan People's Party is going to fade away as you kind of wish the Roman down a little bit?
Yeah.
Very difficult for Taiwanese society. And somehow it's a kind of there's some pessimistic voice saying that we cannot achieve anything until the current stage. Because in our constitutional framework, if the legislature doesn't decide to like ask the premier to step down, the president don't have the authority to dissolve the whole parliamentary. So and also previous weeks the Keelung mayor and we failed to like ask him step down in the voting results. So what can we do now, and how could we deal with the TPP, Taiwan People's Party's role? First, we have to like understand that TPP is kind of weird. It's the combination of like each legislature in the party and each side of each role in that party. They don't have a consistent agenda from each other. So somehow they will tell you A. If you listen, they will tell you A today, and they will tell to B tomorrow. Yeah, we did some effort to like communicate with TPP, including like legislators or any kind of like staff in the party. But the problem is not maybe not their stance. The problem is they don't have a consistent stance, and you cannot like trust or you cannot know what they would do next according to their previous work. So I think for the perspective of civil society, you can still like we can only like keep gaining the momentum from people, from citizens.
Great.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Only for the sake that we're trying to the topic of the economic security, and if you want to chat about the politics of Taiwan, and Minian is going to stay after. I do invite you to do that. I'm just going to turn to Richard in the back. I think he had a question there.
Yeah, thank you to Global Taiwan Institute for offering this event so we could hear these experts and all the insights. So just to comment, I'm a South Korean international student currently attending Georgetown SFS. And I actually have a comment on the question. So the comment that I wanted to make was about the point that you made, Ms. Weaver-Lee, about the democracy. I think Taiwanese people need to keep in mind that US never forced democracy in South Korea in the 60s or the 70s. So they actually wanted, the US actually wanted stability rather than democracy. So South Korea, in my idea, was able to democratize because US wasn't forcing like other areas like Iran or in the Middle East. So I think that was a very critical point and interesting point that we need to keep in mind. And question that I always ask for a few days is that so the TSMC is facing allegations of selling semiconductors to Huawei, and they're potentially violating US export controls right now. So this situation is complicating Taiwan's strategic balancing act amid rising US-China tech tensions. So given this context, I wish to ask all, how does enable TSMC and the Taiwanese government justify its actions right now when these allegations directly challenge the US export controls? And to add on, how could these developments affect the future Taiwanese security dynamics regarding the US-China technological competition that's going on right now? Okay.
Great, so I think there was a question that I think Zoe and Francisco can answer, which is just a little bit about when you pair economic initiatives with an idea of promoting values, is that effective? Or does it even backfire sometimes? So maybe Zoe and Francisco can address that, and Yan can answer the question about TSMC's chips going to Huawei. Zoe, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I'm sure Francisco can comment on this too. One of the things that when I was doing research on Taiwan's foreign assistance policy in South America and Southeast Asia, there was one quote from an interview that basically, when our country works with China, we get a deal, and when we work with the US, we get a lecture. And I think it's a testament to kind of what you're saying about all these standards that are attached with receiving assistance from the United States. Francisco can talk more about that. But for Taiwan, I would say it doesn't really hold that super true to a lot of its foreign assistance programs. And as it does with my comments about subnational eyes, especially in the United States, as I mentioned, it's not a huge selling point for a lot of the interactions between states and localities in Taiwan or versus China. But more so, it's the things that come along with these liberal values or democratic institutions, things like transparency, data availability. That's more so what they care about. And it just so happens that working with Taiwan does promise more of that than it would than I think democracy necessarily is the.
So we talked about polling earlier. We do a lot of work with partners to also make sure that we understand, sort of how young people in Africa feel about democracy or authoritarianism or autocracy, or in Latin America or in Europe, all over the world. And so we study this question pretty closely. What I'll say on this specific point, and maybe as it gets to your larger point, is that our model, I think we learned the hard way, for example, when we were doing HIV work, that when we have a public health crisis, we need to be inclusive and target all aspects of marginalized community. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to, tackle and really prevent the HIV epidemic. Or, for example, studies after studies show that when you want to include, you need to have gender inclusive development in order to actually have sustainable development. Not only at the as an afterthought, but in the beginning of your program design. It sometimes gets called like abstract yes conditions or strings attached. We call it important, sustainable development because we have learned the trials and tribulations year after year. And without naming specifics, right, I think one of the buyer's remorse that you're seeing around, the Belt and Road Initiative is because of lack of consultation of important stakeholders when creating some of these development projects. And so, again, our model's not perfect. It can certainly be faster, and that's a fair criticism. But internally, in terms of the impact, our administrator says we don't just want to get development done, we want to get it done right, because we care about the impact and success and sustainability of our projects. And I think that's a really important topic when we talk about this condition. It's also not true that other actors don't have strings attached. It just happens that our strings are not about Taiwan. Our strings are not about silencing issues around Tibet, Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, right? And so, sometimes we want to make sure that we push back against some of those narratives. But there's still a lot of work that we can still be doing. And we're also trying to address those as well.
Quickly on the US and the TSMC.
So first of all, TSMC follow US regulations very clearly. And although I'm not speaking on behalf of TSMC, but objectively speaking, they follow the US export control regulation. So today, like this week, we saw two news informations, but we don't know what is actually behind that business behavior because we are not from TSMC. However, like from Tech Insights, they found the cell phone from Huawei laser chip suspectedly made by TSMC. But some experts from Taiwan and heard they made by SMIC, but it just looks similar to made by TSMC because SMIC copy TSMC's techniques. And second, there's another news saying that TSMC report to Commerce Department saying that we found one of our customers, they may like smuggle our chip to Huawei. So we don't know whether these two events are independent to each other or they are the same events. And so this is the first answer to your question. The second answer is from TDU perspective, we did a lot of efforts on like enhancing Taiwanese economic security framework, including in Chiang tenure, we like formulate we have a new legal concept called national critical core technology. And we think we should apply these legal ideas into our current inbound investment review and outbound investment review, but it's not yet happening.
I think we're going to have to, so I'll go the lady at the back and then that's one.
Hi, my name is Ava from the Reach Group. My question is about Chinese economic coercion against Taiwanese farmers and food producers because there's the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement and China's trying to shorten that as a way to intensify pressure against Taipei. So I'm wondering what are the specific measures that Taiwanese government are doing to help the farmers slash how I guess the farmers are feeling about selling to China, et cetera.
I'll pass that to Yan. If anyone else on the panel wants to have a follow-on, please let me know. And then you want to start.
So if you follow the policy report by Executive Yuan, when China released that trade barrier investigation report, there are several main points in that report that first the Executive Yuan they don't want to fall into the Chinese narrative that follow so-called one China framework negotiating with China. They want to turn this issue to the WTO's platform. That is the platform that involve multilateral international communities instead of only Taiwan and China in the one country framework we negotiate. And second, so they ask China to propose to appeal these issues in WTO. And second, because we all know that China may not do that. So the immediate action for Taiwanese government is to somehow help Taiwanese pineapple farmer to sell product to Japan or the other market in the international society. So if you Google Taiwan Phone, Taiwanese iPhone. Now you might see a lot of news resources on Google result that there are so many like Japanese YouTube influencer or report introducing how good the Taiwanese iPhone is. Yeah.
I experienced the effects of that firsthand when I was in Taiwan, where they would have crates or carts full of pineapples on the streets. And you could buy them for like less than $1 each, because that market was closed off. And I hope Japan can soak up some of that demand. We have a lady in the front and gentleman in the back.
Yes, hi, I'm Tina Chong with the Voice of America's China division. My question is for Francisco. Just wondering, because you talked about pushback, against Chinese expanding influence or coercion against those developing countries. I wonder if the U.S. has, AID has any active plan in cooperation with Taiwan to push back in countries such as Palau and maybe Guatemala, where China, is working very tirelessly to, have them shift diplomatic recognition to China. Thank you.
So let me, as I mentioned, our first and foremost priority is supporting our partners in affirmative economic resilience. So it's not about pushing back, it's about supporting our partners. But second, we have a strong USAID, ICDF, Taiwan MOU, and it has many different facets. We do a lot of collaboration with ICDF in the Pacific Islands. We do a lot of it also in the Caribbean and in Guatemala and Paraguay. And so a lot of, Taiwan has an incredible development track record when it comes to public health, democratic resilience, and so, a whole host of issues, education issues, people-to-people exchanges. And so we see them as a valuable development partner. And oftentimes we find that we cannot have a discussion about development issues without incorporating Taiwan in places like the Pacific Islands. And so, as you know, I worked a lot in the Pacific, and we saw firsthand, Taiwan's impact in a lot of these countries, like Palau, like the Marshall Islands, and in other places that's still recognized.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. My question is also to Francisco, but I open it up to the rest of the panel. So you talked a lot about how USAID kind of struggles to message its successes. And I think local media in country is the most important factor in shaping perceptions of US development projects, which, especially in democracies, ends up shaping policy. You mentioned polling, but does USAID or partners or CSOs you guys work with do anything on narrative promotion, working on shaping messaging surrounding USAID projects in local media, local governments, with community leaders?
So it's less like narrative shaping, just because I'm not sure that's necessarily the role we want to be in. But it is, we do do a lot of media training because we believe that independent free press is important for democratic resilience. And oftentimes we find that the first ones to report on PRC issues are great investigative journalists who know the local environment, who know the local context, and are able to publish those stories. We obviously work very closely with our embassy public affairs department, but we also have our outreach, development outreach coordinators within all of our USAID missions. And part of our goal, right, is to really help inform the public, as well as different impacted communities of our projects, of the work that we're doing, and really the success and impact that it's been having. But it's a work in progress, right? I mean, we're seeing that other countries are a lot more aggressive in being able to get their story out. And even if it's a third-party subcontractor of that state-owned enterprise, they'll put their flag all over that project. And that's really typical to compete. We tend to be a little bit more humble, but in an information environment in which getting the word out becomes a lot more harder. We need to really kind of step up, investing in the capacity to do that.
Add really quickly to that too, on Taiwan's side as well, the ICDF. Because last year, a former colleague of mine here at Global Taiwan Institute and I, Adrian Liu, did a content analysis of regional participants on Taiwan's projects in its ODA partnered countries. And we very quickly found that although there wasn't a concerted effort from Taiwan ICDF to kind of put out a certain narrative about their projects with their partner countries, a lot of these countries naturally talked about long-held partnerships. The most frequent word we saw was mutual partnership or mutual friend was a very common term that local media used to describe Taiwan in its projects. But we did find that, at least for Taiwan, one of the biggest issues was using the name Taiwan in local media. That became a source of contention. So oftentimes, I think that's the benefit that they have partnering with institutions like USAID and through the MOU between USAID and ICDF, that they can leverage kind of bigger partners that can use their own public image instead of using the word Taiwan.
Any more questions? If not, I will ask one, and I think we'll close up with this question. I'm going to address to all of the speakers. So you probably would notice that the question of economic influence, this topic covers many issues. We're speaking about development in countries that have lower levels of industrialization. We're talking about engagement with local business, local leaders in the United States, and we're talking about supply chain security in Taiwan. So this is a very all-encompassing issue. But one of the general themes that probably pops through is that you can't expect countries to break completely their economic relations with China, and the opposite, they don't want to. And in some cases, trade with China is a source of development in communities. So recognizing that fundamental shift, that fundamental challenge, I'm going to ask each of the panelists here today, what is your desired and your ideal end state of your engagement? What would be your ideal kind of scenario you have for economic actors dealing with China? What are you working towards? So as an ideal situation. So I'll pass that to Min Yan, and we'll go down the panel.
Thank you, Ben. So our questions, and I think first of all, we have to, as you say, we have to recognize that even though we are now witnessing the new so-called geopolitical situation, and somebody will call it new Cold War between US and China. But the nature of new Cold War is very different from the previous Cold War between the Soviet Union and US, because US and China, they're still working, collaborating together within the same global capitalist chain network. So even though that we, like in US government, set up the export control measure on certain emerging technology, critical energy. But in a broader field of products, exchangeable goods, we're still working together. And this is the same case for Taiwan. But there will be another challenge for Taiwan that in the previous 30 to 40 years, in the era of globalization, or in the era of US-China cooperation, people will always argue that, oh, you see, Taiwan is so dependent on Chinese market because our exports to China, the amount is really high. We have to recognize that why Taiwan will import so many intermediate goods to China, because the final market is in US. Because the US company, US enterprise cooperate with Taiwan, and Taiwan need to set up factory facility in China to produce that. And now situation changed. And now China is utilizing its market force, its market size to somehow coerce or to make Taiwanese business more like inclined to working in China in the value that's set by China. And we have to address this problem. And somehow we have to face the reality that maybe we cannot like eliminate all the business relation between the two countries. However, we have to set some restriction, reasonable restriction. We have to protect certain industries, certain fields that related to our national security, economic security, and even our democracy. So like from EDU, we have proposed several ideas in the several levels. For example, in terms of the critical technology, we have to enhance our economic security framework. Like I said, we have the legal concept called national critical technology now, but we haven't incorporated that into our broader framework of investment review system. And second, we still see that like Taiwanese those big figures like Jay Zhou or those singers working in China, and they will celebrate Chinese National Day in October 1st. And this kind of behavior or this kind of business things that we have to somehow regulate it, or even we have to have some more creative policies to deal with it. For example, we proposed once a concept called like insurance. Like if you work in China, you have to pay a certain amount of fee, insurance fee, like governed by Taiwan or the other independent entities. And then if the Taiwanese business people like working in China or trade with China face some economic coercion package from Chinese government, and then we can use this fund or use this insurance fund to like compensate their loss and to maintain the reasonable business standard for Taiwanese or for even broader our partner. So I would not say that this kind of policy imagination is already very mature to implement. But at least we have to be more creative, and we have to be more like we're more willing to work together to think of new measures, new policy efforts, and to deal with this complicated cooperation on the side and protect and commitment to democracy on the other hand.
So I think for us, as I mentioned at the top, our end goal, I would describe it as free and open and resilient societies. Of course, that's a very broad statement, but we're not against PRC trade, right? I mean, we know that China's a reality in many parts of the world. China's not going to go away from the Asia Pacific. It's not going to decouple from many economies, and it's not a realistic end goal. What we want is diversity. We want resilient economies, so that when the second largest economy retracts, other economies don't also follow suit. And so our problem is not PRC trade, it's a majority of influence in a way that can be used for geopolitical aims or for ulterior motives. And so that's why we believe that it's important to build resilience, diversification. Some people call it de-risking in certain parts. And it doesn't just have to be the United States. It could be Japan, it could be your European partners that help build that resilience and that diversification. But ultimately that leads to better, free, independent, and open societies throughout the world.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both what Minion and Francisco said, though one thing I would mention is that the United States should remember that it's definitely not the only one experiencing influence from China, using economic tools to meet political needs. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from a lot of countries in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. There's a lot of countries that are also on the receiving end of Chinese coercion. Not only should we leverage our economic partnerships with them, but we can also learn a lot from them in the way that they deal with coercion. I think Taiwan, as Minion mentioned, does deal with this in a lot of creative ways because it experiences such firsthand how much Chinese economic coercion can influence a local society. So I think getting both local and national actors in the United States to go to the region and learn from the region on how they experience Chinese economic coercion is definitely super helpful.
Fantastic. Well, I won't keep you longer. I think that this topic has been, this discussion has been very comprehensive. I hope you leave knowing something that you didn't know before. And if you'd like to engage with our panelists after, I don't know how much time they have, but if you'd like to speak more, I welcome you to do that. So I appreciate you all for coming. We have some more events coming up. You can check on our website, one on lawfare and legal issues related to Taiwan, and another one in a few weeks on LGBTQ activism, also connecting Taiwan civil society to the rest of the world. I appreciate all of your attendance, and I do hope that you'll join us at some of our future events. Also, if you did not get a lunchbox, we did supplement our supplies with 3 more, so please go ahead and grab one if you did. And thank you so much, everybody.
I think we're supposed to do that. And the policy.